Hi everyone, this is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and today on Brothers, Sisters, Strangers, we have a very interesting episode because we're going to be talking about DARVO. And of course, DARVO has become an important concept with regards to language used to describe behaviors associated to narcissism. And we thought it was important for us to talk about because, of course, you're going to be hearing this term more and more in the sibling estrangement community. So I'm here today with Fern, and we're going to be going into what is DARVO.
I love an acronym. It's really useful and it helps you to remember important aspects of this concept. Actually, DARVO is simply a form of gaslighting, and that makes it very timely because, of course, gaslight was the word of the year last year.
Yeah, I remember that they made a list of prominent words, and I think that was one of the major words that came up. Yes.
You never know, Ollie John. This year it may be DARVO.
Of course, right? Maybe it'll be something like that for sure. So let's define what DARVO is essentially, right? I think that's going to be important for people to know what that is. So DARVO is an acronym for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. So it's a cunning strategy employed by individuals when they perceive a threat or are confronted with criticism or complaints regarding their behavior. So this is a tactic that typically wrongdoers will use to evade accountability, for example, to silence the victim, exert dominance and authority, and try to safeguard their own sense of self-perception, if you will.
It is a big form of manipulation. And it's so important for our viewers to know this tactic because it's so common.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does DARVO play itself out? When it comes to denial, for example, which is the first letter in DARVO, it really causes people to essentially bring up a type of issues that will be manipulative, hurtful. This is a pattern that basically manifests regardless of the severity of the issue you address. So it really takes courage to confront a sibling about some of their toxic behaviors. And even if they're small things such as the fact that they touched your belongings or something, they're really going to go into denial.
Well, my most succinct summary of denial is nothing happened and I didn't do it.
That's right. That's right. And I think that that's the thing that happens, right? They'll downplay it. They'll minimize the gravity of their actions in response to accusations or confrontation, and they'll often do so by saying, "Oh, I have no idea what you're talking about. It was just a harmless joke, or I didn't mean it in a negative way," right? So that way, it's only to kind of make the idea pass more smoothly, even though, of course, it's made to deflect, right?
A lot of ready-made excuses. And of course, often they involve, you can't take a joke. And in other words, there's something wrong with you that you're not perceiving this accurately. And that's a big piece of this, that they are challenging your reality. And anytime somebody challenges your reality, you are in the realm of narcissists. And you need to really hold to your own sense of self and your beliefs, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to confuse you so that you no longer can see straight.
That's absolutely right. That's the idea. Is their primary aim is to completely reject any sense of responsibility and avoid acknowledging any wrongdoings towards you. So absolutely, they're going to sow doubt, undermine your credibility and such, in any way they can to essentially just brush it off, right? So, and the next one is basically attack, which is the letter A in DARVO, and it's not just a type of situation that happens typically with a brother and sister. This really goes further than that. This escalates into offensive maneuvers, right? And this is the thing that they do because they'll try to shield themselves from accountability. So when they launch attacks on your credibility, your motivation, your character, then all of a sudden, it's like they question, how dare you confront them about their behavior, right?
Yeah, it's very much a tactic to invalidate and discard and devalue you. And we've talked about this in the past as far as narcissists. So all of what we're describing here are methods that they use in order to undermine, again, your sense of self and sense of reality.
Absolutely, so they tend to counter accuse in some ways, or they'll make assertions that you're exaggerating or lying. In some cases, they'll resort to verbal abuse by trying to shame you, belittle you, humiliate you, or call you names. And it's unfortunate because you might hear things like "you're nothing but a compulsive liar." What kind of person accuses their own sister or brother of such things? Or "you're blowing everything out of proportion." These are the type of things that people hear of, especially.
Right. That's a big minimizing statement. You're blowing things out of proportion. You're too sensitive.
Yeah.
And again, if you think about it, it's this constant kind of eroding of self so that they can gain power. And that's what all of this is about, is some way in which they can tip the scale of the relationship.
Exactly, right. And that's the thing that happens with them, is they always want to safeguard their fragile ego. That's one of the reasons why they do this, right? And it's always to undermine or discredit somebody, because when you shift the focus onto someone else by launching a personal attack, then you're diverting from your own actions and flaws. So it's really an attempt to maintain power and control over the situation, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you see this sometimes with shame shifting and projection, which we've talked about also in previous videos. So it kind of goes in line with a lot of what we've mentioned. So I'm glad that this is coming out, in the general conversation, and that people are going to hear more about this, especially.
Well, and then the next part of this is the reverse victim, my personal favorite. And I've used the term before with you of acid back. And that's exactly what this is. They switch their approach and spit back at you whatever you gave to them.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I remember that term that you had used, especially. So you're absolutely right. It's all about distorting tactic in some ways by twisting the narrative, and just trying to change the facts, right, in that way, and by engaging in role reversal, and casting themselves as a victim and painting you as a perpetrator in the situation, kind of takes the focus off of them, right, and it makes you, of course, justify yourself all of a sudden as if somehow you've done something wrong, when in fact it's not the case at all.
Right. It creates a tremendous amount of confusion and actually narcissistic fog, so that the victim of this doesn't feel like they know what's happening, and they don't know if they can see straight. In a lot of ways, it's right out of that old movie Gaslight, where the lights keep going down and the protagonist keeps claiming, no, the lights are fine.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. So it's always about manipulating your perceptions, manipulating your emotions, exploiting your vulnerabilities, and trying to, in some ways, elicit sympathy by others when they try to victimize themselves. So typical statements that they'll use is, "I can't believe you'd fabricate things just to hurt me," or "how dare you try to make me feel guilty." That's an abusive behavior. And "you intentionally did this to make me look bad." So you'll hear things of that nature, of course.
And that's the thing, that DARVO leads to all sorts of other narcissistic behaviors, such as triangulation, where they try to align support for their positions. Minimization, we talked about. Passive aggressive behavior. They communicate a whole lot without saying a word, through rolled eyes and big sighs and all sorts of things. Anyway, this is like an alert to all of the viewers. Pay attention to these behaviors, because if you see this, you are in contact with a narcissistic sibling.
Absolutely, and that's the thing too, especially when you're seeing deflective behaviors that tend to want to avoid any sense of accountability, then yes, major red flag, right? And of course, when they try to regain control over the narrative and such, or yeah, basically behaviors such as that, such as deflecting and such, are all very much important for us to observe and see from afar, so that way we can, of course, best protect ourselves when these type of things happen. So that leads us into the next part, which is what we want for our viewers is to essentially try to find ways in which they can protect themselves. So I think that that's one of the things that you and I have been talking about a lot, is the idea of not surrendering to invalidation, if you will, into the gaslighting especially, right? We've been talking a lot about that, you and I.
And I want to add one thing here, which is there are a lot of enablers in the world, and enablers pressure you to stay in the game. And when it comes to somebody with DARVO or a narcissist, that may not be your best response. I think you have to really think carefully about giving second chances to somebody who's practicing these strategies. In addition, I just think you need to be aware of the enablers who are pushing you in the direction, particularly other family members, of staying in the relationship for the sake of the family or for whatever other reasons that they come up with. But you could get really caught in all this because of not just the narcissists, but the enablers who are part of it too.
Absolutely. You have to be careful with that, especially with other people that will tend to downplay it or minimize it too, because that will go in the same line as the narcissistic individual, of course, So DARVO is so important to acknowledge because of that. So how do you work with DARVO? How do you work with somebody that's doing this stuff? First of all, what I suggest is keep your composure. Try not to visibly get upset, by limiting what they can use against you, essentially. That's one of the first things I would suggest to people.
Well, that's one of many ways. I mean, sometimes you really just have to decide, should I stay in the game or not? Is this workable on any level?
Yeah.
And for a lot of our viewers, and you can see on the page, it's not. And many have chosen to go no contact. And it's a very personal choice and often a very necessary one, so you don't continue to get hurt.
Absolutely. That is, of course, one of the things that, you can end up having to do to break the cycle in that way, Other things that you can do, of course, can be to not get in a justification match by avoiding the trap of making them understand, right? So that's something that I think is especially important, that we don't get into a type of logical conversation with them or an appeal to calm, because that's the thing that happens. You say to somebody, relax, they likely won't relax, So that's the thing that's really important for us to be mindful of. And another thing I suggest, of course, is to write it down also, to remember details of what's actually happened, so that way that can serve as a reference in documenting abusive behavior in case things escalate or go further.
And I would add, since I'm on the bandwagon about enablers, I think it's important to challenge some of those enablers, because they're putting so much pressure on you, and they're contributing to the fog. And if you have the clarity to see what's going on, I think it's important to say, wait a minute, don't call me out for this when you're part of it.
Exactly. So it's really important that we don't own their words, right? We want to keep in mind that it's just shifting the blame in order to avoid responsibility. So it's never really about us, right? It's really about them, their own insecurities, their tendency to want to lash out, so they protect themselves. So regardless of who's in front of them. So that's really, really important for us not to personalize it, to fall into a personalization match with them and such, So another thing you can do, of course, is to see yourself as you truly are. And this is something that we often mention in the groups, is to hold the vision of who you are, right? So that way you don't let somebody else come up with a false narrative about you that can sow doubt.
What is your reality and who are you? And can you hold on to that in the face of narcissists and enablers?
Exactly. So important for us to, of course, remember that. And of course, setting boundaries is something that we often discuss, to find ways in which you can make sure you're not affected by this. If it means walking away in some conversations, to preserve your own peace of mind, I think that's perfectly fine, and even gray rocking in some ways. If you can't leave the environment you're in, for example, you can come up with short words or sentences until you're actually able to leave that particular environment.
Right. For the narcissist, if you gray rock and there's no validation for them, they lose interest.
Yeah, exactly. So it's actually a good way to diffuse the conversation in that way by gray rocking. So that's certainly something that's helpful. And as you said earlier, of course, cutting contact or going into voluntary estrangement also can be something that we can do as a means of protecting ourselves, but also, of course, talking to someone, right? That's really important. Even just reaching out to a trusted friend about what's going on can really be helpful in terms of venting, because venting is good for us to be able to do. It has the ability to at least make us feel less alone and more understood by someone else.
And to sort through the confusion.
Yeah, exactly. So that's super, super important, I think, when it comes to that. So these are things that we can all do to protect ourselves, of course, from people that will engage in DARVO. So I hope that today's episode was especially useful for our viewers. We're all about giving them practical advice and understanding new issues that arise with regards to sibling estrangement, of course. And I'm already looking at the time here, so we're already almost out of time, Fern. So let's talk about resources. What would be your #1 resource that you think you'd like to suggest to our viewers at this time?
Well, I am continuing to do one-on-one coaching, and these sorts of topics come up in conversation often. I have discovered through my conversations with many who are estranged that narcissists are often in the mix when there's estrangement.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Yes. Yeah. So, of course, my #1 resource is, of course, the upcoming workshop that I'm going to be doing in September, with regards to improving self-esteem following sibling estrangement, So registration is open right now. I want to work with a small group of individuals that are able to participate with me to go deeper into some of the concepts that will actually give them some experiential tools that will especially help them to get beyond this, that they can continue to use even after the workshop. So for me, it's very important that people can feel empowered and get the sense that they're strengthening themselves and ultimately their self-esteem to become stronger individuals in light of everything that happens with a sibling.
Well, always great to be with you. I think this was particularly enlightening. For those who've never heard of DARVO or may have not known that there's actually a label for this, I think it's probably very instructive.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing this, Fern. I always appreciate you being a part of this. So I very much look forward to our next video again soon.
You too.
Take care, Fern.
Okay, bye now.
Bye-bye.